Well, good evening and welcome to Crosstalk. As we always say, this is a program where we look at some of the things happening in this country and we try to put the cross right in the middle of it. Now, tonight we are looking at something that probably has baffled so many people, and it's the African mindset. What can we do to change the mindset? If you're wondering what I'm talking about, you stay around because you'll understand where we are coming from. Africa is the richest continent in the world, yet it's the poorest. That doesn't make sense, does it? All right, to help us understand how we can go about this, I have Wadera Gaido, who is the founder and executive director of Alternatives Africa. And I have Reverend Gregory Kevanguli of Faraja Counseling.
And the Kenya Methodist University.
Yes, and Kenya Methodist University. Karibuni.
Thank you.
Sana.
Now, it is a statement that does not make sense, but yet somehow makes sense in Africa. The richest continent, but still the poorest. In resources, I mean, no continent comes close to us. But yet, we are so poor, it's unbelievable. How do you explain that equation?
I want to look at it very broadly, looking at the foundation. You know, when we talk about foundations, because if there is something wrong with the foundation, then everything else doesn't stand. We are talking about mindset.
It's a mindset issue.
Now, Solomon in Proverbs once said, "For as he thinks, so is he." All right? Now, when you go to the social sciences, there is something that we call cognition, which has to do with beliefs. And psychologists and social scientists have actually agreed that one's belief system plays a key role in determining the direction they take in life, right? So when we are talking about an African mindset, then we are looking at the world view, the belief systems, and so forth and so on. Now, to answer your question, I happen to come from the eastern part of this country. And we have grown up thinking, our region is dry, it is very poor.
This is the Ukambani area.
The Ukambani area.
Yes.
And yet in Ukambani we produce the best mangoes. And it does not take a miracle for a mango to grow and survive in Ukambani. In fact, once you have watered that mango and it has taken root, even if there is no rain, that mango will survive. But you'll be shocked how many people actually plant mangoes. Because we have this mindset that, our region is dry, we don't have rains, and so forth and so on. And this is what led my friend, Bishop Titus Masika, to come up with this project in Yatta, where people were dependent on relief food. By the way, I have eaten relief food for many years. Most of my life, when I was growing up,
You were dependent on relief food.
Relief food because we don't produce enough food because there is no
rain.
There's no rain.
There's no water.
And yet Bishop Masika discovered there was a problem with the people's thinking. And he began to educate them. And I believe his focus was to decolonize their way of thinking and encourage them to start doing water reservoirs. Now today, Yatta produces food, no longer dependent on food relief.
So it's a problem of the way we think.
Yes.
Because if Africa is the richest continent resource-wise, then if what you're saying is anything to go by, then it's simply, what you're saying is that Africans think poor.
Professor Ali Masri wrote a book. Actually, it's also in video format, and he named it Africa, the Garden of Eden in decay.
The Garden of
Eden in decay.
Yes.
And one of his arguments, or rather one of the arguments he raises there, is that one of the challenges that Africa has, it's a sweet and sour challenge, is that for the African, when one fruit is getting out of season, another one is coming in. Africa knows no winter.
Yeah.
Even the coldest season for most of Africa, you will sleep very comfortably. Unlike the other countries, which if you do not do something about your food and about your shelter, you would actually die because of winter.
Yes.
And so they had to innovate to survive. In Africa, if you go to Uganda, you cannot be hungry because the streets, you have bananas. You know, as Reverend has said, in Makueni, if you plant a mango, it grows.
Yeah.
I visited a farm the other day. It's about 3,500 acres in Machakos. And he's doing grains.
Grains.
Grains, just about 3 or 4 kinds of grains. He has only employed 6 people, and he does not irrigate. Simply using, I don't know that they call it crop science or some water science, he does not irrigate. This is in Machakos. You know, I left there so impressed. So where is the challenge? Could it be that we are very comfortable? And now again, another second challenge that we have is that the kind of indices we use for Africa are not by Africans.
The kind of indices.
Indices, or let me
Yes.
say SI units, the
Yes,
standard
yes.
measure units that we use. So for example, we've got the Human Development Index. Yeah, the global human, whereby we are ranked. And of course, African countries are always last.
Yes.
Some years ago, I was in Germany, and a young German girl came and asked me, Waidera, how do you feel about being called third world? No, developing. She used developing countries. And I told her, well, it's better than third world. And I laughed. I found it funny. Then she told me, no, seriously, think about it. You people, if we used an index, you're happier than most of the European. You would rank first. But we rank you based on infrastructure, which of course we will always be first.
Yeah.
And because of that, Africans have been trying to reach standards which, if today Europe and the Western world, something happened and it all got demolished, they cannot afford to build it up again because it was built on the back of slavery. And a lot of resources, free resources from Africa, if they were to purchase and pay for the labor today, they would probably not be able to meet. They'd have to come up with the robots, AI, as they're calling it today. And that goes to show you that one of the problems is the way our leaders have not decided to come up with solutions and standard measures for Africa. Because if you are measuring yourself based on the infrastructure in Germany, when will you ever get there?
You will never get there.
You know? However, and who said anyway, you need that kind of infrastructure in Africa?
Now let me ask you, if what you started off by saying, now look at the mindset.
Yes.
Look at the mindset where Reverend Kiviangulu, where he came from, they believed there's no water, there's nothing. We are dependent on aids, food aids, and he's eaten it the better part of his life. From the same place, now, just by a switch of the way they think, they are food sufficient.
But whose mind caused the sufficiency? It was another African from the same place.
That's right.
You see, so the issue is not that we don't have the mindset, because remember, as John Maxwell said, everything rises and falls with
On
leadership. On leadership. So you have a leader like Mr. Titus Masika, who goes and sees a problem and says, but we can change this.
So where? Because if you look at the entire of Africa, and now not being racist or anything, if you look at South Africa, the Boers basically came with a completely different mindset. When now the South African took over the government, you start seeing things going down. In Zimbabwe, before Robert Mugabe and his team took over the government, you had some white guys leading the country, and the infrastructure and the things were working. Now they're going down. It looks like every time the Africa takes over something, there's a mindset to take him down. So where is this mindset coming up from?
I grew up with a hearing defect, almost 50% deaf. But I refused to believe that I was deaf. And I must say it was the miracle of God. I refused to believe that I was deaf. So what did I do? I set out to work hard. And guess what? I led all the way up to CPE. And I led in CPE and went to the best school from my class. What is it that helped me? Now, there were boys in my class. Now, we are talking about mindset.
Yes.
I remember one particular boy, my classmate, he insulted me and, called me names and said, you deaf, And you know what I told him? You can call me deaf. But time will tell who between you and I is better than the other one.
And let me guess.
Today,
yes.
I am the only individual or human being from that particular class who has gone all the way to university education.
So all that was as a result of the way you thought?
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. I refused to buy into this thinking because I have a hearing defect, then I am doomed. We're talking about mindset. And I believed in myself. And I can tell you, if you watch the way I have lived in my life, God has given me some sense of confidence in myself and in God. And I have checked what is happening in especially where I come from. This is what we need to help our children get, to.
Is this as a result of our education system? Because we seem to have a somewhat common pattern in different parts of Africa. I mean, we almost think alike.
And that's why I agree with Reverend, because ultimately, everything rises and falls with leadership. Today, he is a leader in very many spaces. Everyone may not think the same, but they look up to a leader. Now, when you look at the leadership of the African, basically the African continent, whether it's the African Union and all that, I keep asking myself, are they clear about their identity? Because, and coming back to the spiritual angle of this, if you look at any civilization, you can attach it to a reformation. Whether it was during the times of Martin Luther, whether it was the time of Azusa, you will actually see that there is some sort of industrialization that happens or is attached to actually one of those reformations. Right. And whether we pay attention or not as Christians, our identity is what determines. Let me put it this way. If you don't know why you're here and who you are, how will you know what to do and how to do it?
We will come back because DRC is one of those questions that just baffles the mind. The richest country in the world in terms of resources.
Yes.
But look at it. We continue when we come back.
Now, beginning tomorrow morning on the Jam 316 devotional hour, we kick into a brand new series as we continue talking about discipleship, the cost of discipleship. Tomorrow we'll talk about submission. Forced submission, willful submission. What's the difference? What does God require of us? Also, on Motivation Monday, we'll talk to a father and how he is serving God in his everyday activities. That's tomorrow morning on Jam 316 from 6 in the morning, right here on Family TV, because Jam 316 is the best way to kickstart your day. See you then.
Welcome back to Crosstalk. And just in case you're wondering what we're talking about changing the African mindset, the richest continent, at the same time, the poorest continent. Look at Kenya. Right now, we are talking about drought, hunger. Actually, the number of people who are at risk of dying because of hunger has gone up from 3 million. We are now talking around 5 million. And you're talking about Turkana, one of the counties affected. Yet that county has the largest aquifer, water source, a sea under it. People are dying of hunger up here, lack of water, yet, I mean, how do you explain this mindset? I've tried to, I can't crack it.
What I want to add on to what Waithera has said, yes, the problem of leadership, and not just the problem of leadership, but a leadership without vision.
Exactly.
Because does anybody ever sit down and envision where you want to take your people? Turkana has had leadership. Kenya has had leadership. You know, it baffles me that today we could be talking about lack of water. And yet, even where we come from, we dig. And 80 feet down, we get water.
80 feet.
But by the way, I have a
Wow.
well. I have a well, and I'm growing vegetables. And it is underground water. But in the surrounding area, it is very dry. When the leadership of the African nations is not at all concerned about, you know, improving the well-being and the welfare of the citizens, then we have a problem. But because we are talking about mindset.
Yes, because also the mindset of the led. I mean, why should I die knowing very well I can put pressure on my leader so that we can utilize what is under us?
We have to buy what President Obama came up with. Yes, we can.
That was also a mindset.
I was delivering a lecture in one of the biggest universities in Nova Scotia, Dalhousie University. And guess what I was talking about? The implementation of primary health care in Kenya. That was December 1993. And I gave the lecture because I had worked in the Ministry of Health. You know, I have a medical background. And I had been into the implementation of primary health care. I knew every step, and I had seen it happening. So I go and give a lecture. And somebody from the audience walked to me after the lecture and said, I am shocked by what I have heard you say. We did not think that anything was happening in Africa. And then he told me he was a consultant, an American consultant in Nigeria on primary health care implementation. But he had never heard that primary health care worked the way we had talked, you know, what I was talking about in Kenya. What am I trying to say? If we do not believe in ourselves, if we have no confidence, and she talked about identity, and I agree, if I call it a crisis of identity, and when you couple a crisis of identity with the crisis of belief, then it becomes very sickening. Our situation in Africa is very sickening because we are suffering from double tragedy. Crisis of identity and a crisis of belief.
We don't believe in ourselves.
We don't believe in ourselves, and we doubt even when God has given us blessings and resources. We are not even aware that we have those resources.
How do we change that way of thinking? How do we change that way of thinking?
I'll give you good news. It is changing.
It is changing.
It is changing. And I will tell you, particularly among the youth, because I work in youth enterprise development. And every waking day, I am surprised. The challenge is that the policies, the legislation, and the regulation does not align with this new generation. Yeah. So if we look at the continent, you're looking at the continent, the only continent with the fastest growing youth population. By 2100, 41% of global youth will be in Africa. But they are not only a growing population, they are also right now the most educated and globally exposed generation that Africa has had since what you call independence.
Yes.
Now, these young people are able to see anything across the world from a single gadget.
Yeah.
And they have amazing innovations. They have amazing thought processes. But the one thing that we really, really need to be careful with this particular generation is relief and funding.
Yes.
Now, funding is not necessarily a bad thing.
It's not.
If you look at it as seed, but if you look at it as a lifestyle, then it paralyzes you because you're not looking at the value of the product or innovation you've created, but you're trying to see what's the next innovation competition I can get into. And there are so many young people with great ideas, so many solutions, and all they need is policies, legislation, and regulation that is actually supportive, that is enabling and not inhibitive. And so we've got a country that is ripe, that indeed accepts that it is a youthful nation. But the question is, what are you doing? Unfortunately, and I will say this because this is my space, it feels like youth are a lunchbox. Right now, they're a lunchbox that people collect and go and say, I have youth, give me money. And because the lunchbox, as you can see, in fact, you've got access to very many youth, you put money in the lunchbox. My question is, does a lunchbox eat?
No.
Does a lunchbox eat? So money is put in the lunchbox, but it does not trickle down to the young people. They get training, but they don't get the tools of trade, neither a sustainability framework, because there is no business that grows in 1 week or 1 year.
Yeah.
A business is like a child or a plant. It takes time to grow, and it has to be organic.
So when you talk about policy framework, we are talking about the leadership. Is this
Again, as you
Yes.
can
Yes.
see, we go back
to
leadership.
leadership.
Because vision, let me tell you, we all don't have to be visionaries.
Yes. Do we
God
have
is not a God of numbers. God just needs
Yes.
one.
Individual.
Just one. God says, I looked for a man. We only needed Moses to remove Israel, or rather deliver Israel from Egypt. He only needed one David to slay the giant. He only needed one Jesus to die for you and I. Why do we think we need numbers to transform? Look at what Reverend Masika has done, or rather Bishop Masika. Look at what Reverend Kivanguli is doing, providing water through God's provision. It's not even through digging.
So is it maybe, as I've been told, we are almost winding up. Is it the problem is we are waiting for somebody up there, yet if we change from down here, you didn't have to wait for your member of parliament to do that.
Yes.
Maybe the problem is we are focusing so much on our leadership, which is devoid of the leadership quality and the heart of the people, that we are disabling ourselves. How do we, very briefly, how do we now bring this mindset down? We divorce the leadership and we become our own leaders down here. Very brief.
I think this is where I put this challenge to those of us in church ministry. I think the church is one ideal forum where we can help people to be delivered from those negative mindsets. But then again, our churches, what are we doing? We are doing missions that are totally different from the mission that Jesus envisioned for us. When he said, the Spirit of the Lord God is upon me, he has anointed me. To do what? To bring deliverance, to bring freedom. And you know, that freedom, in terms of health, in terms of economic freedom, but what are we doing? Instead of building, and this is where I pose this challenge to us in church leadership, instead of building God's people, helping God's people to be liberated, to be self-reliant, and to be able to, you know, to make our countries better, we are building structures and institutions. We have become like business clubs. And you know, business clubs usually enrich those, you know,
within the club,
the elite. So I think this challenge should be taken up by those of us in church leadership, that we deliberately elect to make that part of our mission, empowering, like you know, when she's talking about young people, because I'm teaching in a university, I am excited, empowering our young people to be whom God has ordained for them to be.
Yes.
Yes.
Closing comments, very briefly.
I think you need a part 2 of this.
Yes.
And maybe 3, 4, and 5.
Yeah.
Because first and foremost, it is impossible to be able to develop a country without policy, without legislation, and without proper regulation. Yeah? Even if we start from the ground, indeed, people can see the transformation and we can start. But if today Reverend Kivanguli, with the idea and the concept that is already working, for it to spread to the whole of Machakos, he will need the county government to back him up. One, because of the resources, because a government is the custodian of resources, and not just financial resources, even human capital.
Yeah.
He cannot be able to do it alone across the whole county. But then again, I would like to say this to the church. God never intended for us to do it by our own might or by our own strength.
Right.
It's not by might, not by power. It's by the Spirit of God. And that Spirit of God is the one that enables Samson to fight the Philistines. It wasn't by his own strength. It's the same strength that David had. It's the same strength that Moses had. At no point is God telling you, do it yourself. God says he is our great reward. And even in the New Testament, what does Paul say? 2 Corinthians, though we walk in the flesh, we do not
war against
the flesh.
For the weapons of our warfare are not carnal, but mighty through God. When you look at the administrative spirits in Isaiah 11:2, one of them is what? The spirit of might, the spirit of wisdom, understanding, knowledge, the fear of God, and the counsel of God. God has never intended for us to do it alone.
All right. As you said, probably we'll need a part 2 of this so that we can get into the nitty-gritty and get our leaders to use the aquifer in Turkana, make use of it instead of asking the population to donate food to take care of these people, equip them using that water. Maybe that's where we leave it at. How do we change the way we see this world? They talked about identity. Do we know who we really are? I don't know about you. You have yourself a lovely day.